everyone, to part 2 of placing ourselves in colonialism, an exercise that we started in 2023 to look at the links between our own personal histories, our family histories, our family peregrinations, travels to North America from other places, and how that fits with the history of colonization and the ongoing impacts of colonization. So we really focused on family histories and geographies in part 1, with a little tiny tip into talking about it more theologically. And then we decided this year that we would like to pick it back up again and have a bit more of a contextual and or theological conversation about it. So that is our plan. We'll be running 4 sessions, February 4th and 18th and March 4th and 18th. And if you can't attend the sessions, they'll be available on the ChurchX site after the fact. So just to let you know who we are, I'm Sara Stratton, Indigenous Justice and Reconciliation Animator at the Indigenous Ministries and Justice Unit in the United Church of Canada. So my responsibility as a settler person doing that work is to connect with the settler church and the newcomer church around reconciliation. And I'm joined tonight by Beth Baskin from the Church and Mission Unit, who does a lot of work on white privilege and anti-racism. Mo Yango from the Growth Department, who has a lot of responsibility also for anti-racism work and work with diaspora communities. And Jennifer Jansen-Ball, who's the Executive Minister for Theological Leadership in the United Church of Canada. At least I think that's the title. It has shifted a couple of times. So we have very long titles at the General Council office, and we don't always remember them from day to day. So I'm going to facilitate the session. Beth is going to keep track of things in the chat for us. Mo is going to keep things moving smoothly technologically, and Jennifer is going to get us off to a smooth theological start. But maybe we could just show the slide again, Mo. These are the elements we'll have. Once I've finished with the welcome, I'll hand it over to Jennifer, who will talk for a few minutes about what theology is and how does it relate to challenging colonialism. Then we will look at the first reflection together. Some of you have already viewed it. That's from Michael Young in Winnipeg. And then we'll go into small groups where we have a number of questions for you to discuss amongst yourselves. And we'll want you to not report back verbally, but share some notes from that with us. And then we'll have a group discussion at the end about, having had these conversations, where do we think we'll go next personally and contextually. But before we begin, those of you who were in part 1 will remember my fondness for Richard Wagamisa's book Embers. And I will open with a brief couple of passages from that about reflection, about teachings, about listening. They're very brief, like I'm talking 3 sentences each, so it's not a sermon here. So he writes, teachings come from everywhere when you open yourself to them. That's the trick of it, really. Open yourself to everything, and everything opens itself to you. And he also writes, tell the story for the story's sake. Leave your expectations, ego, and doubt at the door, and use the story's energy to do your work. If your worries matter that much, you can pick them back up when you're finished for the day. So let's let those thoughts on teachings and stories guide us in this time of learning and storytelling. And I'll ask Jen to speak to us a bit about doing theology.
Thanks, Sara, and thanks, Beth and Mo as well. And I'm really glad to be here with everybody tonight and to start us off with a short, like maybe 5 minute kind of reflection on what is theology and how does it relate to challenging colonialism and racism in this country. And I saw in the Church Acts course description, it said ground setting with me. And I thought, well, that's actually really a great way to describe it because we should be grounded in ourselves, in our communities, in our context, and the earth itself as we do theology. So this is the ground setting part for tonight. I think many people here will be familiar already with what theology is. So this is an attempt to just kind of summarize briefly to lead us into further reflection. So, in one classic definition, theology is faith-seeking understanding. So, really, anytime we think about our understanding of God, of Jesus, of the Holy Spirit, when we think about what we think the purpose of the church is, about our relationships with one another, our relationships with God's good creation, how we engage scripture, all of that is theology. So, anytime we try to understand how we're experiencing our faith and how others are experiencing faith, and we try to articulate that through words or music, through movement, the arts, and in silent contemplation, all of that is doing theology. This, I think, relates to challenging colonialism and racism in Canada because the main form of theology that many of us may be most familiar with, and one that's still very much present in the United Church, and was a foundational part of colonization, is Western theology, which is a very broad term based on Western European cultural context and understandings of Christian faith. And for hundreds of years, although it evolved in that time, Western theology basically claimed that it was the normative and only theology, and also claimed that it was basically neutral. As we, I think, know, it was used as part of the justification for the sword and the cross, for colonization, just used to justify genocide, territorial expansion, and the control of all bodies, but especially those that weren't white, male, and in many ways had some money. So this kind of theological approach really erased all kinds of differences around class, abilities, race, gender, ethnicity, culture, sexual orientation. And it posited a kind of universal person and theology that was supposed to apply to everyone. So theology itself was both colonizing and colonized. The so-called universal person actually reflected the identities and contexts of those who were doing this theology, which was primarily white European and Euro North American men, often those who had some class privilege. One symbol of this that we might think of is the blonde, blue-eyed Jesus that has been so present in so many of our churches, posited as kind of the universal human being, erasing the reality of what Jesus would have looked like. The thing is that all theology is by its nature situated theology. So no theology is ever done outside of social location and context and ecological location. And no theology is ever neutral in terms of where it starts and where it ends up and what the real lived implications of it are. We also know that for hundreds of years, Indigenous communities, those who have identified as female, as non-binary, queer, trans, two-spirit, those living with disabilities, and racialized peoples have been resisting this kind of flattening of what theology and expressions of faith are for hundreds of years. For us, it's been about since the 1960s, to some extent earlier than that, but there's been a kind of resistance and proliferation of various theologies that have become more and more visible within kind of the mainstream Western churches, in our schools, and in all kinds of writings that we have access to. So now we can learn about feminist theologies, all kinds of liberation theologies, womanist theologies, Latinx theologies, post-colonial, queer, and crip theologies. this abundance of theologies connected to identities in particular is really a blessing. But it's also interesting because we always have an adjective modifying them as if they're still a core theology that these are in reference to, as opposed to also saying we actually have Western white male theology. I think this also matters, not only because we are really starting to live into and recognize the significant diversities of our theologies that express who we are as human beings and how we want to be together in communities. But our theologies are often also implicit. And sometimes we only run into or start to see the ways in which our theologies are reflected in us when those are challenged. And that can be a really hard place sometimes because often these are really deeply held beliefs that sometimes are even subconscious for us. And suddenly something will challenge it and that belief starts to come to the fore for us. And that can be a source of very significant kind of emotional and spiritual upset for us. And so we might resist the ways in which our theologies are being challenged because they've been so core to us, to our identities, and to our worldviews. And I think acknowledging and recognizing this dynamic, both in ourselves and in others, is important as we continue our journeys around challenging colonialism and racism in Canada, because it can help us understand our own internal resistance and what we might be encountering in others. I think the other piece that I wanted to say is just around how we understand what theology is and what we understand to be legitimate theology and how we actually do theology all matter as we lean into continuing to challenge colonialism and racism, lifting up our identities and how those have been formed and sometimes malformed in various communities and in social systems that have continue the patterns of domination and colonization. All of that shapes how we think about and how we do theology. And as we are challenging colonialism and racism within our societies, within the church, we also need to continue to challenge the ways in which colonialism continues to infiltrate our theologies and the ways in which we express that. And so we need to be really intentional about continuing to try to uncover all of our assumptions and biases about theology, including that sometimes we think, I think often implicitly, that only those who have a certain kind of training are able to reflect theologically. But that's not the case. We all engage in theological reflection anytime we think about, talk about, express our faith in ways that help us to understand and live more fully into it. And so I offer that as a kind of opening for our time together, and I'm very appreciative of the videos that have been created because we see people reflecting in real life on their lived theologies and their ways of seeking to understand and situate their faith within a broader context and within their own identities.
Thank you, Jen. Um, I don't think we want to get into a back and forth conversation, but if there's any questions of clarification from Jen, that would you could pop them in the chat or raise your hand. I think she's presented us with a bunch of things that will inform the way we have or you have conversations in your small groups. At least I hope they will. I found it refreshing myself because every once in a while I will say this. I'm a historian, not a theologian. And it's good to be reminded that we all have theological conversations all the time. And it's not something that you have to have a certain standing to do, and that it is relational to the place that you're in. It's relational to the people that you're with, and the person that you are. So if we sort of hold those as we move forward, I do know that some folks have taken a look at the video from Michael Young, and others haven't. And that's fine, because the plan is they're always available a week ahead of time for you to take a look at if you want to and begin to reflect on. But if you don't have time to do that, we're going to do it together here as well. So Michael's is a little on the longer side. The other three are a bit shorter. But we'll view that in a minute. Just a few notes. Michael is very soft spoken, and so if you have difficulty hearing, turn up your volume. Remember, you can control the volume on your own computer, and just maybe just kind of lean in and listen. So Emma was going to get that ready for us. We will watch that video together. Then I'll share a couple of thoughts with you that people have already raised in the forum, and we'll send you off into small groups after the video to have conversation on a number of focused questions. Does that sound good? If there's any strong objection, we can deal with it, but there doesn't appear to be. So we'll see you on the other side of the video.
I'm Michael, a settler here occupying the stolen lands of so-called Manitoba. My ancestors have left me quite a mess to clean up, and I'm grateful to the Indigenous peoples in my life who have invited me into shared struggle. From my mother's side, I recommend the hauntings of a faith sold out to empire, a missionary legacy involving a residential school from which escape cost Bobby Bird his life. From my father's side, I carry a lineage of colonists, not settlers, but true believers in a genocidal mission. We've traced our family tree back 10 generations to the 1700s and the Abenaki lands, now known as so-called Massachusetts. While most of those who form my bloodline chose to remain on the sidelines as not-so-innocent bystanders, others embrace this violence. Statues have been built to honor their faithfulness to the blood sacrifice their colonial presence demanded. I'm left to ask why. There are many contributing factors to this big question, so I'll begin with the only potential answers, which will not come across as a justification of genocide. We fought because we lost our way, because we lacked the responsibility to question the lies told by a faith sold out to empire. We fought because we failed our loving God, because we failed to see the sacredness of his image bearers, and the sacredness of the other beings sharing creation, the sacredness of the lands themselves. We failed to open the eyes of our hearts to see the way these sacred beings were created to work together in nourishing mutuality. I went into this work assuming that 18th century Youngs lived in tension between our faith and our violence, and this illusion was shattered when my research into Hannah Duston led me to Colton Mather, who preached a sermon celebrating a return from captivity, Abenaki scalps in hand, with Hannah herself in his audience. There is no tension here. We were true believers in a God-sanctioned colonial project. Not only did we fight for what we believed in, we fought because it was rewarding. The 4,500 pounds Hannah Duston received in exchange for the tops of 9 mutilated Abenaki bodies is a significant amount, a transaction on the same level as an inheritance. When adjusted for inflation, that works out to 111,600 Canadian dollars. Some in my extended family claim we fought from a place of self-defense. That's an inappropriate phrase to use when describing a genocide in which it's estimated that between 80 and 95% of the Native American population died within the first 150 years of European contact with the so-called Americas. While the Abenaki were being leveraged by the French to fight in King William's proxy wars, this should be considered part of their overall resistance to colonial genocide. The Abenaki were on the defensive here, full stop. Instead of self-defense, I'll use this language. Situations arose during raids when the Youngs did use lethal force to avoid being killed by the Abenaki. What now? The nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy share a core value called the seventh generation, a challenge to consider the generations who will come after us and how they will be nourished by Mother Earth once our time here is done. In her book, Becoming Kin, Patty Crowick makes an interesting point about the connectedness which underpins this concept. Quote, Onikubujikin is the Ojibwe word for great-grandparent or ancestor, but it is also the word for great-grandchild or descendant. The word I would use to describe the person 3 generations before me and the person 3 generations after me is the same word, and it connects 7 generations. Oniku, the root word, refers to the act of binding or joining. Depending on prefix and suffix, this root can become a variety of words used to describe the sewing or tying together of the things. So when I use Onikubujikin to describe my great-grandparents, I am stitching or tying myself together with them. And when I use it to think about great-grandchildren not yet born, I am stitching myself together with them too, tying us all together. Unquote. Could this be the key to healing the past? This connectedness between those who came and those to come? Can that which will be done bring cleansing to that which has already been done and the associated hauntings? I'm not sure about that and may never be. When we met last year, I'd have answered hopefully, and a year and a half later, I'll answer maybe, thanks to some opportunities to learn which have come up. Last winter, I made arrangements to sit down with Geraldine McCandless, an elder who our church had brought in a couple of years ago as a paid consultant to keep us on track and sharing some upcoming events where we were planning would be held in a good way. I'd written a story involving her, and I needed to pass her tobacco and ask her for her blessing to share it publicly. And the conversation went much deeper, as chats with Geraldine always do. We ended up discussing my family history, and she explained that, well, these are things I carry, these are not things I need to carry, and that it's okay to let them go. This June, I was with some MMIW impacted dear friends of ours who have been seeking justice for their loved one. My wife, myself, and a group of Indigenous friends I now consider family were going into court to hear closing arguments. Grandma Shingoose was one of the elders providing spiritual care through this process, and she offered a prayer before we went inside. Grandma reminded us that we're not going into that space alone, that our ancestors would be walking in there with us and would be there to support us together as we went through what was about to happen. I'd been adjacent to many appeals to the ancestors over the years, but I didn't feel like a bystander this time. For the first time, I felt that my ancestors were welcome, were included, had aligned with what brings life, and were now working alongside their Indigenous kin in their space, while I was working alongside my Indigenous kin here in this realm. I'm not sure that was the case, and I'm very careful who I share this with. It reeks of spiritual bypassing and would likely be interpreted that way without the context of relationship through shared struggle. A couple of months ago, I was on Zoom with Patty Crowick, and I took the opportunity to ask her about the hope her insights into that Ojibwe words for ancestors and or descendants had given me. I've also shared this with my elder during ceremony. I summarized my work to reconcile with my ancestors and explained what I'd learned along the way from Patty and Grandma. According to the others, the sweat that followed wasn't any harder than usual, but I felt it intensely. That was a tough one, eh? He asked with a smirk. A smirk one would give to someone who thought this work was easy. I carry a songline, not of settlers, but of colonists, It's a songline of true believers in a white Jesus-sanctioned genocidal mission, and I've chosen not to pass this down. I follow the God of the oppressed, a Christ born on the underside of empire, who faced evil in all its fullness, dissolving it in love as he was crucified by the state. I'm working alongside this risen Jesus to love the hell out of this world, and I've followed this Jesus to the margins, and I found his people there. Among those who've been pushed aside by dominant white supremacists, this heteronormative culture we live within, I found an Indigenous community who have welcomed me. I made friends there who have shared their stories, changed my heart, healing and helping, and moving me further and further into a place of deep solidarity where their struggle becomes mine. When I share what I'm learning with my kids, they are relieved that their old dad finally gets it, and this gives me hope. Even if I weren't about the work of shifting the song line, they would be taking that work up themselves. It's exciting to dream what 7 new generations of youngs will bring. Thanks for listening. Peace and blessings to you.
So thanks to Michael for he told about the direct role that he knows some of his ancestors played in colonization, and then offered his reflection moving forward. We did enable the captioning at a certain point in there. Hopefully that helps some of you with, you should have thought of that earlier. Lesson learned. But you can always go back and watch that again on the committee, on the Church X site if you want. So, yeah, I agree. We made a mistake there by not cluing in on the closed captioning. So hopefully you will be able to, if you want to rewatch this on the Church X site, be able to watch the closed captioning. I do have a transcript. I don't have a transcript of the first part of it, but I do have a transcript of the second part, and I will actually share that in the forum when we're finished, so you can at least read that. Although that was the part that was probably the clearest. So, but I will share that, and apologies for our misstep there. So I took a look at the forum. Several of you, including some folks who couldn't be here tonight, but will be here with us in future groups, reflected and offered. This is a large orange cat, and offered thanks for the courage it took to tell that story. It was Michael did put himself out there and saying, "This is my history. This is what I own, and I'm going to confront it." People, one person noted a real resonance with Michael's elders' advice that, yeah, that history is part of who you are, but you don't have to carry it with you everywhere. You need to know it. You need to be aware of it, but you don't need to let it. I keep doing physical actions of push you down. Those of us who are descended from the European settler colonists bring with us. Our whole framework is shaped by that. And this person said, when the empire feeds you, when you're poor and the empire feeds you, your choices are limited, and it can be hard to speak out. And so empire profits from that, right? It operates on fear and more fear, and it takes courage to stand up to it. And I couldn't help but feel a resonance with what's happening today in our world. Just take out the word empire and put in the word authoritarianism. So those resonated. I just wanted to highlight those points for you: the point about courage, the point about the intractable power of empire, and the point about what we carry and what we can put down. Have already had some reflection. So now we're going to send you into groups. Emma's going to sort you probably into groups of about 4, I think. is the plan. And we do have 3 questions that we wanted you to talk about. We'll leave you in the groups until about, we'll leave you in the groups for about 20 minutes. And hope that you can answer these, you can talk about as many of these questions as you get to, ensuring that everybody has a chance to contribute something if they want. And if you could appoint someone who would take some notes and commit to putting them in the chat afterwards or emailing them to me, and I'll give you my email address so we can get them. Again, this is part of our whole intent to document this ongoing conversation. So Michael talked about what a faith sold out to empire looked like at the time of the English colonization of the Americas, what is now called the Americas. What does it look like now? What does a faith that is sold out to empire look like now? That's one question. Michael sees himself very tied to his ancestors and his descendants. He talked about the use of the same word for both. Do you also see that connection? Do you also feel that connection to your past and your future? And does that make any difference in how you take action today, what you do today in your life? And then Michael talked very explicitly about, I've chosen not to pass this down. And is there something that you have chosen not to pass down? And what would that be? So we will make sure that those questions go into your groups. Either Emma or Beth will visit the group and pop the questions in your individual group chat. But we want to leave you for about, let's say, about 20 minutes and to have that conversation, and then we'll come back. And when you come back, we're not going to report back on those. You're just going to, as I said, share them with us, and I'll find a way. I'll share some of this stuff back in the forum in the coming week. But we'll have another question that sort of sets us, based on the questions that, based on your discussions, sort of where you go next. So if Emma, you could send all the participants into groups, the 4 of us staff can stay outside.
Okay.
And have a good conversation. And please, like I said, make some good notes for us, for our collective. This is a process of collective theological reflection. So thank you.
Okay, the rooms are opening now.
Okay, thanks, Emma. Welcome back, everybody. We had a lovely conversation about cats and theology. Just so you know. So the first thing, if folks have any stuff that they want to paste into the chat from their groups, we could all take a quick look. And if you don't worry, you can send it to me. And you'll see my email there in the chat, sstratton@unitedchurch.ca. And so did we have good conversations? Nodding. Thumbs up. We had good conversations, Sara, but we are not willing to commit to sharing our thoughts with you at this time.
Some of us take notes on paper and not on the computer, so they'll be forthcoming.
Honestly, these difficult people. Thank you. We appreciate anything you can send us when you are able to send it to us. We really do. So we wanted to maybe spend about 15 minutes or 20 minutes. It's really up to you. Depends on how much you want to say or don't want to say. But you've heard from Jennifer about theology. And in fact, she's going to type that up and we're going to share it in the forum so that we have that as a recurring piece that we can go back to as we continue with the other 3 sessions of the course. So you've had that, you've had the viewing of Michael's reflection, some sharing of thoughts on that, and now you've had this conversation about what you think a faith sold out to empire, what shape you think that takes currently, where you do and do not see connection to your ancestors and your descendants, and what you have or haven't chosen to share with them. Elaine has written in the chat, it was particularly interesting how each of us have chosen not to pass down certain family biases. And that is a hard, it's kind of hard to stand against your family, like the way things were always done in your family, right? That could be very difficult. I remember a time with young nieces and nephews at a great moment in history that we were all witnessing. And my father said just this terrible thing. And like, we were like, what do we do? And I know that their parents did speak to them afterwards, but it's hard when that's what you're raised in, and you have to make a choice to do something differently. So to hear that so many of you have done that is rewarding. I see a hand. I see Elaine's hand, so we'll get to you. Room 4 was very good, but we ran out of time. So that's a lesson. Maybe we see if we do a little more time. Beth is just putting into the text now the kind of thing we want you to think about in light of the conversations you've had, in light of the other content we had today. How is tonight gonna guide some next steps in your own life journey and local context? So what is it that we have shared tonight that you might take with you into your work, as a, however you define your place of work, on these issues, and carry forward? And this is a question we're going to ask every week after each process, just so you know. So, Elaine, did you have something you wanted to ask? You had your hand up.
Yes, thank you. I'll just answer your plenary question first. I found it encouraging and interesting that I wasn't the only one who is not handing down these biases. I'm just using that as a general term to cover, specifics. So what I will take home is the fact that I'm not the only one. that the risk I take within my family to, if you want to call it, be different, takes a bit of courage, and risking. My family is a very loving family, so I won't say risking not being liked, but feeling within myself, not that I don't belong, but that I'm different. And when you feel different in the family constellation, it can be uncomfortable. Yeah, so that's enough from me. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. We did have a participant in the last iteration of this course who really rejected what we were trying to do, and could not find a place for themselves in that. And I think that is, perhaps that's tied to some of that going against the grain of what you were raised in, that you were talking about, Elaine, that they were not able to get there. And who knows if they will. But they very honestly shared that with me as one of the organizers, and it's difficult. Janet, your hand is up.
Yes, it is. I just wanted to say that I joined this group and had a great conversation. I wasn't part of part 1, so I've just jumped in here to part 2, and I'm kind of treading water, but being able to talk to Jamie and Elaine and Mark, it just helped me feel a little bit of a direction in terms of starting to look. at my descendants. And so that was encouraging.
Oh, that's great to hear. How many of you, I don't remember everybody who was and wasn't in part one. So how many of you are new to it this time around? Just raise your. Yeah, okay, that's good. Although some of you I know have done the similar kind of work, but not that course. Well, that's really encouraging to see that and to see you're getting sparked to maybe do that, Janet. That's really great.
Mm.
Thank you for sharing that. Jordan asks, are you wanting folks to respond in the group now to the question about our next steps? Yeah, that would be great if there's anything that's informed you. Thanks, Jordan.
Well, I could go ahead and do that. So I've been thinking a lot about, as I'm sure we all have, what's happening right here on our own continent, and how we're going to respond. And somebody in our group was quoting Meg Wheatley, who uses the term islands of sanity, and talked about how like we all make choices, and we need to make choices about how we're going to act and how we're going to respond in the midst of the chaos around us, and longing for a church that would be an island of sanity. And what I notice in myself and in people around me is that what is happening right now is destabilizing our sanity, quite intentionally, I think. But people are angry and scared, and and I know that that's not the place from which we tend to create islands of sanity when we're operating from a place of fear in particular. And so what all of this is suggesting to me, like in terms of next steps, is I need to be very intentional about the practices that ground me and keep me sane and that keep me rooted in the gospel of love. And I need to be choosing community and working with others to create islands of sanity for all the people. Like we are all desperately in need of that kind of refuge, and it won't just happen. Like it needs to be very intentional. So in terms of very practical things, like I used to have a very dedicated meditation practice, which I have become very slack about. And this morning, I just felt like nothing could stop me this morning from meditating, because it felt anew in a way that it hasn't in a long time, like my life depended on it. So, and a lot of the conversations that I've been having with people are about how are we going to create communities that are a place that practice love, including loving our enemies, rather than getting caught up in the fear and the hatred. So.
Thank you for that. I was at the funeral today of a friend's father, who he was a great builder of community, and a version of what you said about not hating those you disagree with. That was integral to him being able to do the work that he was able to do to build his community, was to not allow that to be there, even though there was disagreement and there was anger, and as there is in any kind of a process like that. It was a powerful lesson to sort of hear about this man's life today. And one thing that you said, Jordan, brought me right back to the end, near the very end of Michael's reflection, where he says, I follow Jesus and I'm going to love the hell out of this world. And I thought, there's a mission statement right now. So thank you for sharing that. Darlene is asking if any of us have read Grave Error. I haven't read it yet. I know about it. Did you want to say anything about it, Darlene? If you're speaking, we can't hear you because you're muted. So Grave Error is a book. I forget the author, but it's a exercise in denialism of residential institutions and unmarked burial sites. And it's something that I think I don't think, I know we're being called by the recent report of the special interlocutor on unmarked burial sites to really resist denialism in the form of things like this book or other publications like that. And so how do we do that? I think Elizabeth is showing us the book. Yeah. How do we do that? How do we do that as a church? That's something that we're beginning to explore. I'm actually going out west to do a couple of events on that next month. So, and some of the organizers are here. So that's an important piece. Did you want to add anything, Darlene? I see you unmuted.
I just, when I started to read the book, the hair in the back of my neck went up, like, what are they trying to tell me? But the more I read it, the more sense it made, especially the last quarter of the book. Like, they have some really good responses to things that are written in the Truth and Reconciliation Statement and refuting the many of the things that have been said about it. So someplace in the middle, I guess, is the truth.
Well, I think it's hard to I think we have a tendency to really want to try and find a middle ground, especially when we're faced with something that is so hard. It's hard to see yourself in that. It's hard to see your government in that. It's hard to see your church in that. But we also have a very solid evidentiary base that was brought forward through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, not just through oral testimonies, but also through archival research. A similar round of work done by the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit groups inquiry, and now the special interlocutor. So there is a wealth of evidence, and there is also a defensive posture. And I think we need to maybe spend a bit more time weighing those. So this is certainly going to be something that we're going to be talking about, including that book. Hillary, can I learn more about what you're doing out west? Yeah, I'm coming to Saskatoon, Edmonton, February 27th to do an event at Southminster Steinhauer. And then I'll be in Saskatoon on March 1st, doing an event somewhere there. Where are you, Hillary?
I'm on the West Coast, so I'm in Vancouver.
Okay.
So I was hoping you might make it this far, but
I'm not making it that far on this trip, but we are sort of talking about how can we animate this work, either in person or online. So we can definitely look into some possibilities.
But I put my hand up because there was actually something else I wanted to say.
Yes, go ahead.
So another book I've encountered is written by an Oxford professor in England, where I think there's a lot of denialism, more than in Canada sometimes. And it's called Colonialism. And I'm quite interested in the way that something that reading that, which I find difficult, the way that half-truths are used to say this information is suspect. And when Vancouver had its Writers' Festival, Murray Sinclair was due to talk, but he was ill at the time in ICU, and there was a separate discussion with sorry if I'm going around the block, but instead of having Murray Sinclair and Nugent Sinclair, we had Sheila Rogers and Tanya Gallagher talking about Murray's efforts and the TRC. And when I asked Sheila Rogers, what do we do about people who, because the book Colonialism is very well reviewed in newspapers like The Guardian, it was, she said, don't bother writing to the author, but write to The Guardian and say, why do you review this book well when there are so many factors that are ignored in what is apparently, credible research? That's my bit.
And so those can become steps in part of this journey that we're in this course together on. We're in this course because we want to make a difference around the ongoing legacy of colonization in Canada. So that can be as simple as questioning the review in The Guardian, for sure. It can be as, simple as sharing material. The question is building our capacity to do that. And before we started talking about the book, Janet put a poem in the chat that really speaks to me. This is a way of resisting. I'll just read it to you. In a time of hate, love is an act of resistance. In a time of fear, faith is an act of resistance. In a time of misinformation, education is an act of resistance. In a time of poor leadership, community is an act of resistance. In a time like this, joy is an act of resistance. Resist, resist, resist. And it was written by Lauren Brantz. So I think that's a beautiful place for us to land as a way forward. And it actually makes me think of that litany that Kerry Wiellander wrote back in the 90s that we used to use, I think, in almost every justice-oriented event around the year 2000, was persistence brings forth transformation, right? Like an ant carrying a grain of sand. It's a beautiful liturgy, and it goes along with this really, really well. So are there other things that people would like to share? Well, I want to thank you all for coming. I especially want to thank Jen for being with us as our special guest theologian. She's not going to be with us every week. This was, as I said, a special appearance. But we really appreciated the ground setting, and we will continue to share that when you're able to type it up for us and either send it to me or post it in the forum yourself.
Yeah.
So thanks for coming. Thanks for your engagement. I'm going to close us again in a minute. We have next week off. We'll be back on the 18th of February. And I believe the 18th of February is Deanna Cox reflecting on promising occupied land. Yes. So that will be our focus next week, the story of Exodus. And we'll follow a similar pattern. So just a closing, I mean, honestly, the poem was beautiful, but I still like to end with Richard Wagamese. I want to listen deeply enough that I hear everything and nothing at the same time, and am made more by the enduring quality of my silence. I want to question deeply enough that I am made more not by the answers so much as my desire to continue asking questions. I want to speak deeply enough that I am made more by the articulation of my truth shifting into the day's shape. In this way, listening, pondering, and sharing become my connection to the oneness of life, and there is no longer any part of me in exile. So, thank you all. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care, and if you need to, meditate.